Hello everyone, my name is Preston Dennett, and thank you for joining me for a new episode of UFOs and the Paranormal. Guess what? It's time for another UFOs over your hometown episode. A lot of you out there have requested various locations for me to look up, and I've been very busy at it. These episodes take quite a lot of research, so I'm doing the best I can. But yeah, this episode is called UFOs in Your Hometown, Episode 15. I've got 7 locations for you today, 6 in the United States, 1 outside of the United States. But these locations include MILDURA, Australia, Tiburon, California, Corbin, Kentucky, Glassboro, New Jersey, Winter Springs, Florida, Massillon, Ohio, and finally Smithfield, North Carolina. These do, of course, include pretty much the full range of UFO encounters, plenty of sightings, but also landings and humanoids, missing time, and no overt onboard encounters, but definitely having missing time, probably some onboard cases as well. So, without further ado, let's just get started because I've got a lot of information to share with you today. I think these episodes are really important because they show that UFOs are ubiquitous. They are seen everywhere on this planet, and the implications of that are profound. So the first location I will be presenting today is MILDURA, Australia. Thank you very much, Kel, for suggesting this location. So interesting. There's about 30,000 plus people living in MILDURA currently. This is in Victoria, Australia. The location is pretty famous for growing grapes and citrus fruit, but an absolute fascinating history of UFO encounters there. It was 6:30 p.m. on March 10, 1967, as Brian Wilshire, his wife, and their 3 children, and Mrs. Wilshire's 2 parents, Hector Coe and his wife, drove along the Silver City Highway between Derriton and MILDURA. Suddenly, a dark gray object appeared ahead of them above the road, easily visible as it was silhouetted against the sky. It was oval-shaped, they said, quote, like a rugby ball, and it had a dome on top. Hector Coe estimated that the object was no higher than 90 feet and that it was much larger than an average plane. They all noticed something, quote, like a heat haze around the craft. It was in view for just about 3 minutes, when, as Hector Coe says, quote, it shot away and disappeared from view. I would say its speed was between 200 to 300 miles per hour. Now Brian Wilshire attempted to speed up and keep the object in view, but it disappeared into the distance. Mrs. Wilshire said, I was pretty frightened. I had never really believed in flying saucers, but I do now. So they contacted reporters who checked with the MILDURA balloon launching station, and the station told them that they had no balloons in the air at that time. It was just a few months later, on the night of June 21st, 1967, that carpenters Bob Burke and Sam Hudson described their sighting of a bright green object with a yellow tail darting across the sky and losing altitude as it disappeared across the horizon. It was in view for only a few seconds and moved too fast to determine the exact shape, but they felt it was about 6 feet across. It looked to them like it had crashed, so they drove to the area but were unable to find anything. Meanwhile, a couple in nearby Sunraysia said that they saw it break into 3 pieces and believed it was a meteorite. But, according to the Panorama Page newspaper, quote, this is the 4th UFO to be seen in MILDURA in the past 6 months. So maybe that was a meteorite, but there's still other activity going on. For example, this next case. On April 17, 1970, at least 6 people reported a saucer-shaped object with lights around the edge moving southwest over the MILDURA airport area. One lady described it as, quote, something in the sky, flying very low, making no sound, and disappearing towards the aerodrome. She said it was definitely not an ordinary aircraft because it had no navigation or landing lights. Officials at MILDURA Airport were contacted, but said that they had no information about the sighting. Next case, June 3rd, 1971. A man was stunned to see two red lights sitting in a field. He drove up to them, and as he approached, he saw that this was actually a vehicle of some kind about as large as a semi-trailer. It immediately rose vertically from the ground, making a loud whistling noise, and disappeared. This was one of many sightings taking place all across Australia around that time. 2 years later, October 31st, 1973, multiple people saw more than a dozen objects from MILDURA to Mooroolbark, and among the witnesses were police and airline pilots, all who described the objects as having long, comet-like colored tails moving in formation northwest to southeast. According to the pilots, these objects were, quote, traveling very high and very fast. Senior Sergeant L. Milbourne of the MILDURA Police said, "I thought it was a comet or a plane. Then I counted 15 of them. They had long tails and seemed to be traveling in formation towards Melbourne." Another witness was Ron Pigden, and he said he counted about 5 of the objects. Another witness, Caroline Wells, said she counted 4 or 5, all which were in formation. Per all the witnesses, the objects appeared just after 10 p.m. and were visible for about 1 minute before disappearing. Around 8:15 p.m. one evening in April 1975, a 16-year-old young man was walking back to his home in MILDURA. He was about to enter his home when he looked up in the sky, and as he says, quote, there it was, a large black disc with lights going around and around, just sitting there in the sky, low enough to land. I reckon a half-mile up, maybe less, hovering. I thought it was going to land. It just sat there. He could hear no sound coming from this object. The only sound he could hear was the music coming from the rehearsal of a brass band off in the distance. His neighbor came out and the witness stopped him, pointed to the sky, and asked him, "What is this, so that I am not dreaming?" The man looked up and said, "Holy bleep, it's a UFO." They watched it for a few moments. The man then left, so the witness ran inside and told his family that he just saw a UFO and it was still outside. At that point, someone in the household ran outside just in time to catch a glimpse of this object as it moved away. So many cases. Here's another one. September 25, 1976. 4 witnesses were driving west of town when they came around a corner and apparently upon a UFO just sitting in a field. The witnesses include Bert and Vera White, Kim Williamson, and Joe Sharipa. They first saw these red lights flashing in the field, and immediately the lights moved upwards, and this is when they realized that this was actually a strange object of some kind. They heard a low humming noise coming from it as this object rose slowly off the ground, hovered momentarily, rose again, and then crossed the road to their right, hovered slightly higher before taking off. Vera White said, quote, "It was eerie to see those lights." 3 days later, they went to this field where they saw the object and were amazed to find a 71-foot wide circle of flattened, discolored grass. Samples from the circle were taken and sent to a local university who could find no signs of radiation. Witnesses did notice that the ants in the area were avoiding the circle. Now, the Royal Australian Air Force heard about this sighting, and they issued a press statement dismissing the landing traces as being caused by space garbage re-entering the atmosphere and burning up. Researcher Paul Norman, who investigated the case, wrote in response, "That's the first time I ever heard of space junk maneuvering, landing, and leaving a perfect circle and taking off at high speed." Next case, 5 a.m., May 17, 2002. 2 officers on routine patrol, they're known only by their first names, Greg and Kate. They were patrolling Apex Park, which you can see here, when they saw a very brightly illuminated silver shape hovering above the river. They said it darted off in mere moments, prompting them to call the station saying, quote, "We've just seen a UFO." They did attempt to give chase to this object, but it was too quick. It was already gone. Later, a police spokesperson said it appeared the UFO spotted them at the same time as it shot off in the direction of Golgol. Now, one of the officers was vindicated because several months ago she apparently saw a UFO in this same area, and as a result of that became the source of laughter and ridicule among her colleagues. But now she was having the last laugh. Thank you, Pell, for suggesting that location. I thought the landing trace case was probably the most interesting there, but I find all of them really fascinating. What's such a shame is that the vast majority of people do not report their cases, especially if it involves humanoids or an onboard case or something really extensive. So again, just the tip of the iceberg here. I would bet that there's probably thousands of sightings and encounters in each of these locations. But let's move to the next one. This one is Tiburon, California. This was suggested by Gary McEwen. Thank you, Gary. This turned out to be a pretty interesting location. It's not a huge town, about 9,000 people live there. It's right next to San Francisco, so really there's quite a few people in this area. It's a beautiful place. Tiburon means shark in Spanish. This town was named after sharks because apparently there was a lot of tiger sharks seen off the coast there. I found 3 really amazing cases here, so let's just get started. On August 26, 1956, a gentleman by the name of James Gear was driving to his home in Tiburon when he saw what he first thought was a flock of 9 small birds flying north in a loose and ever-changing formation. Then he realized that no, these couldn't be birds as they were moving far too fast. He estimates a minimum of 90 miles per hour. As he says, I believed they were birds until they passed behind a nearby hill. Now he is unable to say how large they were or how far away, and he notes that if they were further away, they were probably much larger and could have been moving above 1,000 miles per hour. As he says, the objects were quite dark and the hill a bright amber. A brief but interesting case. And here's another one. November 5, 2006, a 48-year-old man and his 10-year-old son were working on his book report when the son, who has great vision, pointed out a strange object hovering in the southwest towards Belvedere Island, very high in the sky. It was just a small, dark speck, but it did not appear to be moving. So together they retrieved a pair of binoculars and fixing on it, were amazed at what they saw. Says the father, I could see the object clearly. It was a perfectly round, dark-colored disc, flat, no bulges, and it was in constant motion, doing gentle and slow figure eights, tilting and banking and turning slowly. There were no markings on the exterior, no exhaust ports, no lines or markings of any type. The flying disc stayed in the same small area of the sky. So he estimates that this object was hovering about 2,200, maybe 3,000 feet high and about 4 miles away. His best guess was that it was 30 to 50 feet wide. As it moved, it would glint in the sunlight as though it was made of metal or had a metallic surface. So he and his sons took turns looking at it through the binoculars. They said the glint of the object was easily visible with the naked eye. They finally decided to go get a camera, but when they came back, the object was gone. Interestingly, not long after that, 2 military jets showed up and circled the area. The witness is a former airport employee, and he is convinced that this object was not any conventional craft. As he says, there's no question in my mind that we saw a flying disc. Next case, 11 p.m., August 15, 2019. A 54-year-old father and his 4-year-old son were driving southbound on Tiburon Boulevard when a purplish, red-orange, cigar-shaped object passed only 80 feet over their car. They estimate it was about 24 feet long and 3 feet wide, was heading towards the direction of the Golden Gate Bridge, which is not that far away. As it passed over their vehicle, the radio cut off, the dashboard lights flickered, and the engine lost acceleration. all in just a few moments. It quickly returned to normal, and they watched this object until it disappeared over Richardson Bay. He then continued south on Tiburon Boulevard, stopping at the Caprice restaurant, which you can see here, and got out to see if he could see the object. He says suddenly there was, quote, an extremely strong downdraft of wind that moved the trees in different directions, as well as a loud whooshing sound, which he connects somehow to this sighting, though he didn't see anything. Returning to the car and driving off, he now noticed that there was a power blackout across most of the county. It lasted for more than an hour before power was restored. Coincidence? Hard to say, but he mentioned it in the case there was a connection. Thank you, Gary. A really interesting set of encounters there, especially that last one. Seeing that UFO pass so low over the car must have been a thrilling sight. Amazing. Once again, I'm proving my point that UFOs are being seen everywhere. A couple of you have suggested locations where I haven't been able to find encounters yet, but I'm not going to give up. I'm going to say I'm still batting 100% here, so we'll see. But a few are definitely beginning to stump me, and I'm a little worried that I'm not going to be able to find an encounter there. We'll see. I'm going down the list as fast as I can. The next location I am presenting today is Corbin, Kentucky. Thank you very much, Condos and Karens. This was so interesting to me. This is not a large town. There's about 8,000 people, 8 square miles, so a pretty small area, but I found 8 really amazing cases. So that's really fascinating to me that I found that many in such a small town. But wow, so interesting, some of these cases. The first case I could find in Corbin, which by the way, is well known for being the birthplace of Kentucky Fried Chicken. First case I could find occurred in the 1960s, and it comes from Karen Ferris. She says that her aunt and uncle, who were not yet married, were driving late at night when, quote, this thing, a UFO, followed them along Spring Cut Road over to Echo Valley Road and disappeared. They said sometimes it came very close and other times further away. They were scared out of their minds. Not much detail to that case, but certainly interesting. And there's many more. One evening in September 1973, a man went to go visit his brother in Corbin, and along with him was the man's father. They were driving from Louisville and had just exited the I-75 at the Corbin exit and were heading eastbound on Highway 25. They were only a few minutes from their destination. They were planning on having dinner there at 6 p.m., so it was before 6 p.m. Suddenly, they saw something odd and became very disoriented. Says the primary witness, it happened like a memory. It was like what happens when you are in an accident. We both looked at each other and said, did you see that? At the same time. What I remember seeing was a large object with a door on it that opened down like a drawbridge, and a bright red light coming out of it. That is all I remembered. At this point, they noticed something else. It was now dark, where before it had just been before sunset. Arriving at their destination, they discovered that their brother, or the son of the father, had given up on them and eaten dinner. It was now 9 p.m., they discovered, so they were missing about 3 hours of time. At the time, they really couldn't all the pieces together about what was happening, and only figured it out years later. The witness did discover a healed scar on his left forearm following this encounter, and he is now wondering if he and his father were taken. As he says, my father and I saw a strange light on the ground and then lost 3 hours. I have no answers as to what happened to the 3 hours we lost that evening. Amazing. And here's a very dramatic sighting with many witnesses, which occurred one evening in 1988. A young couple decided to take a drive to the nearby Cumberland Falls, a very popular tourist site and also very popular for dating couples. It was around 1 a.m. and they were standing at a lookout called Lover's Leap, along with many other people, when they noticed a, quote, extremely huge object. They said it was coming at treetop level over the other side of the river, And as the boyfriend says, it was monstrously large in size. It was moving slowly and made no sound at all. Needless to say, we were stunned and stood there looking at this thing until it came to a complete stop over the center of the river. Due to its size and us kind of being in a valley, we could not see the whole thing at once. And it was right there, right in our face, and larger than any object we have seen in our lives. So they could see that this object was a massive saucer covered with a multitude of lights on the bottom, and as the witness says, I yelled for everyone to run, and we ran, without stopping, back to our vehicle, which in itself is a good distance. We were so scared that we did not even look back. So they stayed in the car while all the people around them scrambled into their cars and started driving away. They remained in their car, and at this point the craft was gone. They spoke with the park ranger about a half hour later, and he denied seeing it. They thought hundreds of people must have seen this thing, that it would be front page news, but they never heard anything about it again. Says the witness, believe me, people, this was nothing man-made, and it still scares me to this day. So he eventually reported his sighting to New Fork in the hopes of finding other witnesses. Here's another. Late one evening in 1999, a couple was driving on a remote gravel road off the Cumberland Falls Highway just south of Corbin. They were talking to each other when the husband suddenly shouted out, "What is that?" The wife looked and saw a huge light. It was ahead of them through the trees. Both were nervous about what it might be, but their curiosity overcame their fear, so they continued driving towards it. And as they got closer, it got larger and brighter, and finally they came around a curve right up to it. And as the wife says, it was a light as big as a Volkswagen, and so bright it lit up all the trees just below it. It was just right above the big trees that were growing near the edge of the road. So at this point the husband asked, should I turn the car off? And she replied, no, just kill the lights. So they rolled down the windows, could hear no sound coming from this object. The husband turned off the headlights of the car, and at that moment, this weird light just disappeared. As the wife says, the exact moment that our headlights were turned off, it vanished. There wasn't any talk between my husband and I for a bit, because my husband turned those headlights right back on, and we were probably a half mile from that spot in what seemed like a fishtailing, gravel-flying second. So it sounds like they might have had missing time. They estimate they saw it for 7 to 10 minutes, but it's unclear whether they took off themselves or suddenly found themselves a half mile away. Either way, as the wife says, quote, we have told this to many friends and family members through the years in hopes that they would broaden their views on life that exists on other planets and take an interest on knowing the truth that we are not alone. Another case occurred about 4 years later on September 17, 2003. It was 9 p.m. A man was outside his home stargazing when he saw a reddish-white, star-like object appear at a low level overhead, and then it started to descend. And as the witness says, it was a steady light, moving at a controlled, deliberate speed, coming so close to the yard it was level with the high treetops. It looked like a bright star with a hard, almost diamond-like brilliant center surrounded by a softer glow of the same color. Although at first I was mesmerized by its beauty, the closer it got to me, I became terrified and ran inside. At the risk of sounding completely bonkers, the reason why I got so frightened was I felt like it would have come right down to me if I hadn't gotten out of the way. Amazing. Here's another case. 8:38 p.m. on November 18, 2015. The witness was at 231 Eaton Lane. You can see it here. He was working on a water line with his stepson and son-in-law when suddenly the area around them lit up with this eerie green glow. And as the witness says, I looked up to my right, and they did as well, to see a 20-foot by 20-foot bright green orb descend down out of the sky and hover above a single wide mobile home. The middle of the orb was a lighter green and a darker green around the edges, It hovered in one spot for 2 or 3 minutes without making a sound as we walked closer to it. Then, when we were within 30 feet from it, it started hovering slowly off to the right. So they said the orb made no sound that they could hear, and it darted away within just a few seconds. He did try to take a picture, but for some weird reason, the camera would not pick up the orb. Here's another case. March 12, 2017. It was 9 p.m. A man was sitting in his car in rural Corbin, just watching the sky, and suddenly he noticed a bright, solid, star-like light moving around an estimated 150 to 200 miles per hour in a straight line across the sky. So he didn't think too much about it until suddenly it came to an instant stop. It then immediately decreased in brightness, becoming a pinprick of light, and was gone. And instead of shrinking, it looked to the witness like this object was moving off into the distance directly away from him. It was less than 3 minutes later, he says, 2 fighter jets appeared, traveling to the exact spot he had seen the light disappear. So it looked to him like they were following this object. And shortly after that, 2 other jets appeared and also went to the same spot. Very strange. A final case in Corbin occurred on May 30th, 2021, when a man says he saw a triangular-shaped object, solid black, with little lights all around the edges. You can see a reproduction of his drawing here. He said it moved very slowly and in perfect silence right along the treetops, finally descending behind them. And that was the last he saw of it. This sounds to me like it might be a TR-3B, but you can make up your own minds about it. Thank you, Condos and Karens. Corbin, Kentucky definitely delivered. Truly astonishing. I think that case at Cumberland Falls was probably the most fascinating of that bunch of cases. But also that one with the couple in the forest where they see this UFO about the size of a Volkswagen. It sounds to me like they had missing time. That was a very close encounter. Kudos to everyone who's had the courage to come forth and share these encounters. Can't say it enough. Most people don't report. I'm guessing the numbers are somewhere between 1 in 50 or 1 in 100 people who report their encounters to, say, the police or MUFON or NUFORC or other UFO reporting investigations. So most cases go completely undocumented, unreported, which just goes to show how common UFO encounters are. Because if they are being seen everywhere, and I think that's what these hometown episodes are proving, shows that this is far, far more common than most people believe, I think even within the UFO community. So let's move to our next location. Our next location that we will be exploring today is Glassboro, New Jersey. This is thanks to Bobby Twizzle. So interesting, Bobby. I have a sneaky suspicion why you chose this location, because it just happens to be the location of a very famous and controversial UFO incident. So I'm really glad you suggested it. It's not a huge town. It's got a population of about 20,000 people. It's an old location in terms of people having settled there way back when. Back in 1779, there was a very famous glass factory that was constructed there and played a significant role in glass production in the United States. That's what it's most famous for. That's how it got its name. But in terms of UFOs, there's a encounter there that really put that town on the map. So this is really exciting. I'm so glad you suggested this location. Thank you, Bobby Twizzle. Let's get started. This next encounter occurred on September 5, 1964, and at that time the town of Glassboro had only about 10,000 residents, but it was about to be put on the UFO map. This case received national attention. Over the past week, there had been a number of reports from residents seeing a round, red, glowing UFO in the area, particularly in the woods surrounding Glassboro. On September 5, 2 young boys, Ward Campbell Jr., age 11, and his little brother Don, age 8, they were the sons of Ward Campbell. They were fishing near a very small lake on the property of Frank Sergi. You can see the little lake here. When their father picked them up that evening at around 5:20 p.m., the boys told him that two tall men approached them. One was barefoot, they both had long blonde hair, and these men asked them if they were interested in seeing a UFO. These men, according to the boys, were very slender, and they had beautiful fair skin with no pimples, unusual looking. So they walked to the area and saw a red glowing object landed on the ground, and then it immediately took off. So this is the story the boys told the father. From this point, the story gets a little garbled. According to another source, these two men came up to the boys and said that they were the ones who saw a red glowing object descend into the woods and land, and they then took the boys to this landing spot and showed them burn marks on the ground. Now it turns out that the father, Ward Campbell, was a member of NICAP, the National Investigative Committee on Aerial Phenomena. He went to the scene and verified himself that there were in fact landing traces. And very much impressed by them, he notified the state and local police and Air Force personnel at McGuire Air Force Base. Now, according to Ward Campbell, and I quote, "Upon going to the scene, it was readily apparent that a very unnatural scene was evident in this natural wood clearing. Immediately evident was the crater on the ground, the scorched earth surrounding it, the broken tree limbs, and partially uprooted tree, and two obvious holes, and the white chemical and metal bits in and surrounding the crater." According to Ward, the imprint was about 20 feet wide, 35 to 40 feet long. The central crater was 30 inches across and 19 inches deep, with 11 4-inch depressions equally spaced around it. He also could smell a sulfurous odor lingering at the site. So the policemen showed up. One of them reportedly picked up a whitish powdery substance in the area, but dropped it immediately and in surprise, as he says it was as cold as ice, and it actually left his fingers numb for a period of about 24 hours. Now, according to Frank Sergi, the owner of the land, and his neighbor, Rich Marcel, they heard or saw nothing on that night. But within a few days, this story spread like wildfire, and people began to arrive in very large numbers to view the landing traces. In fact, according to the owner of the land, some 4,000 people showed up. Researchers soon showed up and learned that there was a witness to this red object. Mrs. Frida Dufala said that she saw a red globular object hovering in the woods in that area on that very night. Not only that, 3 nights later, on September 5, Irene Ritter and Carol Smith said that they saw a bright orange-yellow sphere with a red glow apparently land in the forest. They said it made a dull thumping sound, and then it rose above the treetops, moved off in a westerly direction, landed again, or so it appeared, and then finally took off for good. So more and more people were coming to view these landing traces, and by September 8th, there were 6 helicopters overflying the area, 3 police cars on the property, and more crowds of people watching as this investigation took place. Reportedly, the Air Force didn't arrive until September 10, long after the site had been thoroughly contaminated, and after a brief investigation, the next day, they announced that the landing was a hoax. They said that they had found 3 bubblegum wrappers, footprints of a size 8.5 sneaker, and the remains of a cherry bomb. And they reportedly identified the hoaxers, 2 teenagers in the crowd of people watching them investigate. So they didn't say how they had any idea that these 2 were the hoaxers. Actually, later, Maston M. Jacks, a Pentagon UFO spokesperson, denied all of this. So this case just gets weirder and more confusing. Around this time, Alphonse Zuli of Avanti Tree Saving Service in Oradell visited the site to investigate it. He was called in as a tree expert, and he said that if it were a hoax, it would have required heavy machinery to make. He said they found singed leaves at the top of a 40-foot oak. A pine seedling was found uprooted, but with its roots still fully intact, and Alphonse Zuli wrote, We do not know of any manner in which this could have been done except by air pressure. Our unanimous conclusion as tree experts was that a hoax was patently impossible to produce the damage we investigated on the trees. Now, they weren't the only ones to doubt the Air Force's hoax explanation. The owners of the land, Mr. Sergi and Mr. Marcel, were also skeptical of the hoax theory. So was Glassboro patrolman Robert Tuffhill, who said, "It's possible that it was a hoax, but if it was, I'd like to know how it was done." Researcher Dr. Pagano also investigated the scene and doubted the hoax explanation, and he said he found it very interesting that the Air Force continued to visit this area for days after they had already issued this hoax explanation. Things weren't over yet, because later accusations of a hoax resurfaced. Reportedly, 18-year-old Michael Halowich confessed to Detective Captain Philip Coppolino that he, and according to some sources, 2 of his friends, were responsible for the hoax. This was found out when he apparently approached the newspaper giving a pseudonym, trying to sell a story on this case. He said after he heard about sightings in the area that he went there and dug a hole, poured kerosene into it and set it on fire, then dug smaller holes and broke branches off of the nearby trees, all to simulate this UFO landing site. He said he obtained radium dioxide and sprinkled it around the site to make it appear radioactive. There's no info on where he allegedly obtained this material, nor is there any evidence that radioactivity was found. But according to Michael, he then approached the Campbell boys and told them that he had seen a red glowing object land. So this is what he said happened, though this is in contradiction to what other witnesses say. But regardless of this, Michael Halowich was brought to court. He appeared before Judge Lawrence Myers and was given a fine of $50 for disorderly conduct, which was immediately reduced to $10 just to pay for court costs. Now, Ward Campbell says that his sons described seeing these very unusual looking men, tall, handsome, with blonde hair, and to this day, these 2 men have never been identified. He also says that following this incident, he received a series of harassing phone calls. Many prominent researchers showed great interest in this case, but most of them pulled back after these hoax accusations. But now some feel that the hoax itself was a hoax. So it's very hard to say what's going on here. To this day, the truth about the incident remains a mystery, with some feeling it was a hoax and others maintaining it was a real incident. Either way, it's certainly not the only UFO case in Glassboro. On December 5, 1973, college student Jean Ann Rader was driving in the area in the evening when she saw what she described as a flying hamburger-shaped object. She noticed this bright red light in the sky, thought at first it might be a fire, but then she saw that no, this was actually an object and it was heading towards her, or she was heading towards it. Focusing on it, she saw, quote, bright white lights. These were coming from the sides of the object, which appeared to have portholes. You can see the drawing here. She also said it was making a weird hissing sound as it moved by. So a weird, solid UFO of some kind. Another case occurred at 8:05 p.m. on January 15, 1999, to a junior high school student. This student was being driven by her mother to a doctor's appointment, and as they headed along Lehigh Road, which you can see here, she saw a bright object hovering just over the treetops on the edge of the field alongside the road. She said it was disc-shaped or oval-shaped and a bright yellow-white. It moved back and forth horizontally over the treetops very smoothly and quickly, stopping on a dime and moving in the opposite direction. Now, her mom did not appear to see it. She was concentrating on driving. This actually surprised the witness, as it was very obvious, very visible. She did tell her mom to stop, but her mother continued to drive for about 60 feet before stopping and then asked what the matter was. And the witness told her to turn around and go back
because she had just seen something unusual. Her mother asked what she saw, and the student said, "Never mind, let's just go." But as the witness says, though it was a surprise to see the object, for some reason I felt like the whole thing was nothing exciting. By the time I had gotten home from my appointment, I had forgotten about it. I remembered it later that night, but it wasn't a big deal, and I didn't talk about it to anyone. It was a few years before I really took any interest in my personal experiences. This was triggered by seeing other objects in the sky and having a long rash of unsettling dreams. Very strange. On December 25, 2011, a Mr. J.G., those are his initials, and his wife were driving home heading south on South Woodbury Avenue, which you can see here. And as they reached Delsea Drive and were about to turn right, Mr. J.G.'s wife shouted out, "Oh my God, what is that?" Says Mr. J.G. I looked up and saw about 10 orbs floating in a formation across the sky. I briefly slowed down to observe them, then quickly turned in the nearest parking lot and jumped out of the vehicle. There were numerous cars pulled over along the road observing the event as well. The red glowing orbs appeared to be floating in a formation type pattern. So Mr. JG tried to use his wife's digital camera to take some photos. The photos did not come out apparently. At any rate, another car stopped and the driver said, "What's going on?" But at this point, the orbs began disappearing a few at a time, either flying away or turning invisible, and in a short time, the orbs were gone. One final case. At 5:30 p.m. on September 12, 2020, a man was in his home when his infrared security camera triggered an alarm. So looking at the image in his camera, he could see a glowing oblong object hovering directly over his yard, projecting a white beam below it. So he immediately went outside, and to his shock, nothing was visible, not by the naked eye. He did notice that his outdoor cat appeared to be looking up at this object. So he went back inside, and he could still see it on his security camera, but it immediately shot back up in the sky. So he went inside, and shortly later, the alarm triggered again, and apparently this object was back. As the witness says, it would leave my yard at times, going back up into the sky, then come back down to resume what it was doing. I could not see it with the naked eye. It showed up on my infrared security camera over a period of 5 hours, constantly triggering my security alarm. At one point, it crossed my backyard while I was sitting on the porch. I felt no discomfort or heat. Eventually, it slowly rose into the sky and disappeared.
How cool was that? That 1964 case is really a head scratcher. I'm still not sure what to make of it. I don't know. I presented all the evidence I could find. Very controversial, but certainly interesting. All right, let's move to the next location. This was suggested by Derek Kennedy. Derek, you've been incredibly patient. I had a very difficult time looking up encounters in this location. This location is Winter Springs, Florida. Pretty interesting place. About 33,000 people live there. More than that, actually. It's very much connected to Orlando, Florida. But way back in 1960, I found out only 600 people lived there. So it's grown exponentially in population. And I found quite a few super fascinating cases, about 10 cases that I thought were worthy of inclusion. Again, I could have included a lot more, things like anomalous lights, but I kind of skip over those because while I think they are important and do add to our knowledge of what's going on here, they're not as interesting as the cases involving solid objects perhaps, or humanoids and things like this. And they're just not as interesting. So I tried to pick cases that have, are more credible or more extensive in some way. So I think you'll find these cases pretty interesting. I certainly hope so, Derek. Thank you for suggesting this location. Thank you for being so patient. Let's get started on Winter Springs, Florida.
One day in February 1997, there was a group of 6 people who were taking turns jumping on a trampoline at their home in the backyard when they saw a, quote, top-looking shape in the air hovering above us with no sound. Per the witnesses, it had lights surrounding it and was visible for about 5 minutes before moving off. There's really no other info on this case regarding the exact time or the age of the witnesses, but it's just one of many in Winter Springs. And here's another. 11 p.m. one evening in September 2001. A man and his children were in a parking lot in Winter Springs when they saw a strange object moving north to south overhead. And as the father says, it was more than 500 feet above us, but it was followed by 2 American military jets. The craft looked like a boomerang with very bright lights on the front. It had to have been at least 300 feet across, and it made the jets look like toys. Why would our government follow a UFO? Are there crafts like these that we have created? It's a good question. I think a lot of the things people are seeing are our own reverse engineered craft. I don't know. There's always another case. On January 11, 2003, about 10 minutes after noon, 2 friends were standing in the backyard of one of their homes, again in Winter Springs, when they saw a strange craft that they could not identify moving overhead. And as one of the witnesses says, it was very high up and moving in a slow, straight line. I ran very fast into the house to grab the binoculars. The object was somewhat flat on the bottom and domed on top, not like pictures of flying saucers that I've seen. The top was domed like half of a circle. The object seemed compact in shape, not long and stretched out like an airplane. The object was a very strange shade of green, kind of lime-colored, and never changed its brightness. It was very bright. We've lived near airports our entire lives and have never seen a craft this shape. So they watched it for about 5 minutes until it moved off and faded away into the distance. Here's another case 1 year later, March 7, 2004, at around 2 p.m., a teacher of autistic students was outside with 2 of his students. This was just northwest of Orlando International Airport, and they were watching planes cruise by when suddenly they saw a, quote, silver egg-shaped craft. According to the witness, the smaller part of the egg was flying in front. It made no noise, and it was going slower than the planes. They didn't notice it until it was halfway across the sky, so they only viewed it for about 15 seconds until it was gone. But they were absolutely convinced that this was not any conventional craft. Here's another interesting case, which took place 15 minutes before midnight on June 25, 2009. 3 people were sitting on the back porch of their home in Winter Springs when they saw an odd-looking object move across the sky and then suddenly do a 90-degree right turn. And it was low enough that they could actually see the city lights reflecting off of it. It did not appear to them to be any normal aircraft. As the witness says, it had multicolored lights in an odd pattern. We all came up with 9 lights on the object. U-shaped is how we described it. So as it turned, this object seemed to take on a more triangular-looking shape, but it had way more lights than any normal aircraft. And as the witness says, we were very excited to see a UFO. Here's another case which took place at 10 p.m. on November 12, 2011. A married couple stepped outside their home and saw an unusual glowing sphere which seemed to change colors, and it was hovering and then darting back and forth in different directions. So they quickly got a telescope to take a better look at it, and as one of the witnesses says, it seemed to have electricity pulsating all over the sphere, kind of like a plasma ball. It had almost all the colors of the rainbow in it, but the main ones being white, red, blue, and green. They said it was at a very high altitude, so they couldn't really tell how big it was or how far away, but both were deeply impressed that it was not anything normal. Here's another case, February 2nd, 2013, 11:33 p.m. An aviation industry employee was outside his home when he saw a cluster of 8 to 10 bright orange-yellow star-like objects, which were quite low on the horizon and zigzagging in a kind of stacked pattern formation. He said they were moving in a way that was unlike any normal aircraft. They faded away after only a few moments, but the witness saw them long enough that he feels certain they were unusual. As he says, "I've never seen anything like this in my life. I always thought I would only see something like this on TV." 1 year later, December 19, 2014, witnesses observed what they described as a V-shaped object with red and yellow lights flashing on and off. It was stationary, and then one by one the lights started to disappear. And as the witness says, a car drove up to us and asked us, "Are they UFOs?" We said, "I think so." And they said, "Yeah, they are UFOs." Then one UFO remained visible and bright. Finally, it disappeared too. Now it turned out there was in fact another witness who said that on that same night he saw what he counted as 6 to 8 orange and red lights hovering in one place in the night sky. He believed they were approximately over the intersection of Dyke and Tuscaloosa roads, and as the witness says, they were hovering in one place. Their alignment was horizontal but scattered. They did not make a straight line. He turned around in his car to get a second look, but by the time he turned around, these lights were gone. A final Winter Springs case took place on January 13, 2019 at 15 minutes after midnight. The witness had been outside for a few hours watching the lunar eclipse, and then suddenly he heard this low rumbling noise. And as he says, "I looked up in the sky to see what looked like a big round black spaceship and a smaller round dome shape in the sky. It was right above me, and a glowing ball descended down and started to speak to me. I turned around and it disappeared." So per the witness, he heard what sounded to him almost like a distorted voice coming from it. At this point, the smaller dome-shaped object moved down, and he said it had two, quote, "round reddish circles in it." And according to the witness, one of them opened up, and inside he saw a, quote, "black and gold robot-looking thing." He says, quote, "It stood there looking at me." So he watched for about 5 minutes until this red opening closed up. The object moved off, lighting up the whole sky white, he said. And at the same time, he says, quote, "there was a loud ringing, humming sound." Now the witness did have a camera, and he tried to take photographs, but it was too dark to get any details.
So there you go, Derek. Definitely found some cases there, including one that appears to be a humanoid. That last case is pretty interesting. And I know that there are a lot more cases in all of these areas. I've said it, a few times already, but it bears repeating. UFOs are seen all over this planet. It's just so astonishing to me. All right, let's move to the next location, which is Massillon, Ohio. This was suggested by Jim Fisk. Thank you, Jim. I think of all the locations I explored in this video today, the ones here were, to me, the most fascinating. A couple of really fascinating humanoid encounters. Just absolutely amazing cases. There's about 32,000 plus people in Massillon. It's very much connected to Canton, Ohio, so it's hard to separate these two towns, but I pretty much focused only on Massillon, and I found 11 really important, I think, cases. On May 17, 1964, witnesses from various cities in Ohio saw what they described as a multicolored whirring object which darted around from 9 to 10 p.m. It was seen in Massillon, Worcester, Smithville, Burbank, and elsewhere. It reportedly interfered with the police radio at one point and came so low, according to the witnesses, it looked like it was ready to land. And it was just a few months later, on August 8, 1964, at 9:30 p.m., when a very strange incident occurred. 3 parachutists had just completed a parachute expedition north of Massillon on State Route 93, around this general area that you see here. Suddenly, they said a formation of 11 objects appeared overhead. The witnesses include Lee Hammock and his wife, Ben Wolf and his wife, and Alani Massey.
The 11 objects, they said, moved in a weird triangular formation for about 4 minutes, then took off together to the northwest at high speed. 1 year later, 9 p.m., October 6, 1965, a family of 5 and one friend were returning home from a school concert when they saw a, quote, a shiny, silvery white, fat, cigar-shaped object coming from our left, coasting over the woods behind my house. As the witness says, we stopped the car, turned off the engine, and all of us climbed out, watching the object move over the woods. It didn't make a sound. Moving pretty fast, suddenly it stopped dead, hovering over one of the tallest trees. It sat there as if watching us for maybe 4 minutes or so, giving us the opportunity to really look at it. It had soft orange lights pulsing on either end of the cigar shape. There was a strip from end to end of windows, bluish white from within, and we could just make out some shadowy figures. We couldn't make out any features. We were stunned because we all saw and watched it. Being a teenager, I was more excited than scared. It seemed to be looking at us too. After those 4 minutes as we watched, it shot straight up like lightning, disappearing into the night, still without any sound. An amazing case. 1 year later, June 2nd, 1966, at 7:30 p.m., Harold Harper was talking with some neighbors in the front yard of their homes in Massillon when someone shouted out, "Look, there's a fire in the sky." Looking up, he saw a huge object coming from the southwest. He said it looked to be about 50 to 60 feet in diameter and was shaped like a cigar with a ball on one end. So more neighbors came rushing out, and they all watched this object hover about 1,000 feet overhead. To their surprise, it then released 3 smaller objects, which each gained altitude, separated, and darted away at high speed in different directions. Meanwhile, the large cigar-shaped object darted straight upwards at high speed and disappeared into the distance. Now, it was just 2 evenings later, according to the witness, my friend and her sister and I were sitting outside their house on their back patio, and there it was again, still coming from our left, a little higher up, and just as silent. It passed over us and headed to the right and disappeared. We never saw it again. Now later the witnesses did learn that the airport nearby was inundated with calls. As the witness says, I felt calm and full of wonder having witnessed such a thing. And if I had any doubts about other life and beings existing in our incredible universe, they were completely laid to rest then and there. Since then, it has been fabulous learning about the universe we live in. I'm not afraid. If whatever is out there wanted us destroyed, they certainly would have been capable of doing that by now. Amen, I agree. Here's another case. On the evening of October 17, 1973, there was a huge wave of sightings over Ohio, with sightings in Akron, Willoughby, and one really remarkable sighting just north of Massillon. The witness, William Greiser, says he was driving home south on Massillon Road, you can see it here, when he says, quote, this thing came down and landed on top of the car. He said it was very small, about half the size of his car hood, and as he says, I know it doesn't make sense, but that's the way it came out. It was solid white, with a kind of rainbow effect. It scared me. I hit my brakes and it came off the car. Now later, an examination of the car, which you can see here along with the witness, there were 4 strange marks on the hood of his car. Very strange. This next sighting occurred around noon one summer day in 1978. The witness, known only as Brian, says he was 4 years old, living at Stooldrayers Street and Wales Avenue, which you can see here, when he saw an object come very fast from the north and stop directly overhead. He immediately became mesmerized by it, only snapping back to attention after he heard his mom calling him. But he says from that point on, he's had other sightings and has become deeply interested in this subject and feels that humanity is facing major earth-shaking events. So many cases. Here's another. In June 1982, some 200 residents in Perry Township phoned the police saying that a UFO was hovering over their neighborhood. About 150 of these calls came from nearby Canton, but the other 50 came from the Stark County Sheriff's Office and the State Highway Patrol Post in nearby Massillon. Residents described the object as large, red, luminous, and skimming over the treetops for a period of 25 minutes. They did, of course, call the police, as I stated. Police did arrive on the scene, but by the time they arrived, these objects reportedly picked up speed and shot off to the southwest just before the police could see them. Here's another case, May 23, 2007. This is an interesting one. Rosemary Lyons, a barmaid, and her fellow employee went outside in the back of the Massillon Moose Lodge, located at 2935 Lincoln Way West. You can see the exact location right here. It was 10:40 p.m., and as they later wrote to the Massillon Independent newspaper, quote, "The first thing I said was, 'Oh my gosh, look at that.' We looked to the west to see an object approximately 60 to 70 feet above us. It was traveling east at about 15 to 20 miles per hour with all white fluorescent lights illuminating the whole underside. It was approximately 50 to 60 feet in diameter. It wasn't a plane. It wasn't a helicopter. It wasn't a blimp, and it wasn't a balloon. It made absolutely no sound. It was flying over us, just carefree, like it was no one's business. So needless to say, she came away convinced. As she says, there has to be something else out there. I think people see these things and don't say anything because people might think they're crazy. I hope now some other people come forward." So many cases, and here's another. On the evening of July 23, 2012, a witness was able to capture a glowing object over Massillon on videotape. And here is a very brief 10-second clip of the sighting. As you can see, this just appears to be an anomalous light at night, but according to the witness, it's unexplained. And I will say, anomalous lights are definitely the most common type of UFO sighting. But here's another interesting encounter. It was 9:25 p.m. on March 18, 2014. A man was standing outside his home, talking to a friend and smoking a cigarette, when he saw something strange out of the corner of his eye. As the witness says, there were 10 to 20 large green balls, all in a perfect straight line, all steady. Then they all started to blink faster and faster, and they all went out at the exact same moment. Now his friend lived in nearby Canton. He told his friend to hang up and look outside. Meanwhile, he called the police, who told him that he should probably just call the airport. Looking back outside, he saw weird lights flashing over the horizon where these lights had disappeared, and further investigation revealed that there was actually a power failure in that area. The witness's friend also saw this weird flashing, but as the witness says, "I honestly think that the power outage, wherever it was in northeast Stark County, is linked to the UFO. It wasn't a natural event. For me, this was 100% alien and not just some light in the sky." Here's one final event, May 26, 2025, when a witness says he videotaped a glowing object over Massillon. Here are a few clips from this videotape. You can make of it what you will. It's just an anomalous light at night.
Thank you very much, Jim. I had a lot of fun exploring Massillon. I love the photographic cases, a video case even, so that's amazing to me. That one case where the UFO came down and basically landed on top of that guy's car, how unusual is that? And yet, it's not unique. There are a number of cases like that one in Australia involving the Knowles family. So apparently that's a thing. Pretty darn rare, but it does happen. So let's move to our last and final location for this hometown episode number 15, which is Smithfield, North Carolina. This is a smallish town, 12,000 people, about 12 square miles in the town proper. I've found 3 cases, sure there are a lot more, Again, I discarded the ones involving anomalous lights at night, which were seen for just a few moments. But wow, first case in this bunch is probably my favorite of all the cases I'm presenting today in this episode. It's just so amazing. This was suggested by the great Brian. Thank you, Brian. This is so much fun exploring each of these locations, and Smithfield definitely had some interesting encounters to offer. This case is so amazing. It was in the summer of 1984 when 45-year-old Wilma Creech had an experience she would never forget. At the time, she lived in a mobile home on a dirt road in a rural area just outside of Smithfield, and as Wilma says, I'm going to quote her at length, "I was in my bedroom when I saw a bright light in the woods. I walked to the window to look out. I thought it was some people spotlighting deer. I went into the yard and watched it come over my house. It was oval-shaped and looked to be about the size of a trailer from a tractor-trailer truck, except it was tapered at each end. It hovered over the cornfield next to my trailer. It was about 25 feet in the air and making a humming sound. It was about 25 feet up and 25 feet away from me. There was a light coming out of the bottom like a spotlight. The spotlight was moving around in a circle, and then it shined right in my eyes. It was the brightest light I've ever seen. I could see a row of colored lights down the side of the thing. It was so close that I could see what looked like little window panes, the kind you have in old houses. The lights shining through those windows were green, red, and blue. I don't know what it was, but it scared me to death. I couldn't move my arms or legs. I just stood there and looked at it. It hovered there for a little bit and then moved over a row of pine trees, across a pasture, and then landed behind some trees. It scared the horses in the pasture to death, and they started running. They broke out of the pasture that night. I went along the path in the woods as far as I could go, but I didn't see anything else. It was going towards my daughter's house, so I went back inside and tried to call her to see if she'd seen anything, but the phone was dead, and all the lights were off. So it was about 30 minutes later that the phone and lights came back on by themselves. Later, Wilma tried to tell others what had happened, but they did not believe her. And as Wilma says, it didn't matter if they didn't believe me or if they thought I was crazy. I knew what I saw. People tell me I didn't see anything, that there is no such thing as UFOs. But I did see it. If you don't believe me, that's all right. But lying won't get me nowhere. I have nothing to gain by making it up. But I know I'm not crazy. I know what I saw. So that was Wilma's encounter, but events were still in progress, because not long after that, her daughter and niece said that they were driving about 8 miles away from Wilma's house when they saw a large oval object appear overhead, hovering over a nearby cornfield, and send down a beam of light to the ground. And as Wilma's daughter says, "At first we thought it was an airplane, but when it got close, we got scared just about to death. It was round with a red light all the way around it, then a green light, and a spotlight shining on the ground. Then all of a sudden, the spotlight went off, and the thing just went straight up and disappeared. We really did see it. It really did happen." One final case from Smithfield. On February 27, 2013, at 8 p.m., a woman received a frantic call from her daughter who said that something very strange was happening at her home and to please come over quick. She said, "Mama, I do not know what is going on, and it is scaring me badly." So the mother, with her young niece, raced westbound along Highway 70 over to her daughter's home in Smithfield. And as the mother says, "Just as I got close to my daughter's house, my niece saw a large light in the sky changing colors. This object was appearing and disappearing, and as they drove up, they couldn't see it anymore. But her daughter and son-in-law said that this whole incident began when the son-in-law heard a weird, loud noise coming from outside. Rushing outside, he saw a large object. It immediately tilted towards him, as if looking at him. That was his impression. And then it tilted back the other way. He said it was so low, he thought it was going to crash. It had a weird shape, kind of like an airplane, but clearly wasn't a plane. He watched it clear the neighbor's house,
very low, then swooped down to ground level, and only then did this weird noise stop. Moments later, a second craft appeared, also making a loud noise. It joined the other one hovering over the field. At this point, the son-in-law ran back inside to tell his wife, but she was already on the porch watching it. The son-in-law ran to the back of the house to watch the objects moving silently away. They saw now that their neighbors were also looking at the objects, and in fact their neighbors jumped into their cars and followed these two objects as they moved off. But at this point a third object appeared, making a strange noise and then turning silent. By this time all the dogs in the neighborhood were barking loudly. So apparently this last object was the one the niece had seen, but it was now gone. Following this incident, shortly afterwards, the airspace became very busy with Air Force jets crisscrossing all over the area, not in normal traffic patterns. The witnesses stood outside for the next 2 hours, waiting to see if any other UFOs would show up, but none did. However, the next morning on the news, there was a story about people between Smithfield and Selma seeing weird, unexplained lights and crafts.
So there you go, the great Brian. Smithfield, North Carolina definitely has a history of UFO sightings. Sorry I couldn't find more. It amazes me that I don't find more encounters in all of these locations, given that there's 12,000 people there, and 1 in 20, according to some studies, have seen a UFO. So there, you can do the math on that. There's hundreds of people in each of these locations who have seen UFOs, and again, most people aren't reporting them, and I can't blame them for that. I always ask people, did you report your encounter to say MUFON or NUFORC? And usually the answer is, what's MUFON? So this subject definitely has suffered due to the worldwide UFO cover-up. It's such a shame. This is information that I think all humanity deserves to know about. It's one of the reasons I do these episodes. And yeah, I've explored a couple of hundred locations so far. If you'd like me to explore your hometown, please feel free to suggest it. Bearing in mind that my list of locations to explore is now over 1,000. So I'll put it on my list, but yeah, you're gonna have to be patient because these do take a lot of research to find cases in all of these locations. But it's so much fun. I always learn something, and I just find this subject endlessly fascinating. So real quick, before I say goodbye, I just want to reiterate the profound implications of the fact that I'm finding cases in all of these locations. One, it means that UFO sightings are far more common than most people believe. There are well over 1 million documented cases from the various databases. For example, in the United States, NUFORC, National UFO Reporting Center, and MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, alone have a couple of 100,000 cases. And that's just in the United States, and that's just 2 of the reporting centers. So we're looking at millions of documented cases all over the world. You can easily times that by 100, so yeah, 100 million UFO cases. That just goes to show how common these are. And what does that mean? What's the takeaway? For me, the takeaway is that UFOs are conducting a vigorous publicity campaign. They want us to know that they are real, that we are not alone. I think this is one of their so-called agendas. They do watch over Earth very closely. That's apparent, especially from the onboard UFO cases. But yeah, so many cases make it clear that they definitely want us to know that they are real. My assessment. But I'm just presenting the facts as we know them. So of course you can make up your own minds about what's going on here. But I think these cases alone that I presented in this episode show conclusively, at the very least, that UFOs are real, whatever you may think they are. I personally think they're extraterrestrial, but that's just me, based on my own research and personal experiences. So that's it for today. Thank you guys for suggesting these locations. Thank you all for watching. I truly appreciate it. And until next time, keep asking those hard questions, keep searching for the truth, And most important of all, keep having fun. And I'll see you next week for another episode of UFOs and the Paranormal. And yeah, if you have a location you want me to look up, please feel free to suggest it. That's it for now. Bye.